Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael.
What's up, guys and gals? How's it going?
He said,
I'm now fulfilling halves of mine and Casey's contractual obligation.
Well, how you doing, Michael?
I'm doing real good. Just got back into town last night and had a relaxing, bordering on criminally lazy day.
Cool. I had a good weekend. I took family pictures, so I'm excited to see those. And yeah, we are in for an exciting podcast, getting to talk about the stack this week and kind of understanding how the stack works and some of the things that you can do to gain an advantage when using the stack. So let's get right into this podcast. So before we get started, we want to talk about our sponsors, both the Mana Base and Oasis Games. You can check out the Mana Base at themanabase.com. You can see some awesome fresh Magic content there. They post tons of content there, and if you are looking for more stuff than just this podcast, I would highly recommend them at themanabase.com. They are a great place to find awesome new content, including Nikachu, who is the modern legacy Merfolk wizard that recently top-aided that GP with Merfolk not too long ago. So check that out at the Mana Base. You can also check out Oasis Games. They are a great place to buy Magic cards. We really mean it. They do a lot for us, and we really appreciate them. And I mean, they really do a lot for us. So check them out at Oasis, mtgoasis.com. You can get 15% off of your first order by using the code CCMTG at checkout, and you can get 4% off of every order by using the code Would That Be Good with no spaces. So yeah, check them out. Let's get right into our show. So every week on the show, we want to give a special shout out to the people that bring us the show, which is the patrons. So you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg to become a patron of the show, starting at $1 or more per month. Anything that you see fit is really appreciated. If every listener of the show donated just $1, we could all quit our jobs and just do this stuff full time. So I mean, we have a lot of listeners, and it would be a lot of money per month. So our newest patron is James H. Just want to give a shout out to James. Thank you so much for your donation. It really brightens up my day every time I get that. So just want to say thank you, and we really appreciate it. If you become
it's really cool just to know that people are enjoying the content you're providing. That's really sweet.
Yeah.
And really any way that you get that feedback is pretty cool, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And this week was humbling in the form of like just the amount. Like, I feel very lucky to be in a situation where people get to enjoy this thing that I put together and that they find some kind of enjoyment out of it. We got some pretty positive feedback for last week's episode, and it was very rewarding, and we really appreciate those kind words because it brightens up our day. So thank you so much. Let's go right on to the next segment, which is our Patreon question. So if you're on the show, if you are a patron of the show, you can participate by submitting a question. This week was outside of the normal means, but I thought it was good enough that we were going to incorporate it into the show from our Constructed Critics group. So if you are a patron of $5 or more per month, you can join the Constructed Critics group, where you can get early access to deck lists, just interact with us on a more deep level, and it's a pretty fun way to kind of see what we're working on, the decks we're taking to tournaments and stuff like that. So Michael, why don't you go ahead and read this question?
All right, I'm just trying to get it to pull up. All right, going to start out by saying that I'm usually an extremely positive person, even more positive when it comes to Magic, but here's a small rant. I don't get triggered or irritated very easily. It takes a lot. But Friday night, I got a chance to make it to FNM, and usually if I go, I'll play a fun or janky homebrew, something different than I play at a PPTQ or, a Comp REL event. Anyways, on Friday, I took my vehicles deck because I needed more practice with it, wanted to perfect my line, stuff like that. And in round 3, I played against an opponent who was an extremely salty, woe is me player. Every turn, he's saying things like, oh man, another Mardu player, or why bring your tryhard deck to FNM? Or wow, you were so lucky, things along those lines. And, usually I don't let this get to me, but this really upset me and it affected my play and my enjoyment. This doesn't happen very often, but how do you guys deal with things like this?
Yeah, so this question is near and dear to my heart. So there was a video that kind of went the Twitter rounds, I think 2 weeks ago, about net decking. And I just...
It's just my favorite term. I just love it. It's just oh man. I mean, I understand wanting to play your own decks, but the idea that like it's so weird to me to criticize people who don't want to play bad decks by like
Finding good decks to play.
it's just such a strange line of criticism.
Anyway, so there's this video that was circulating, and there is a contingent of players that say, quote, net deckers are ruining Magic, and like, all net deckers are cheaters, and like all this kind of stuff. And I just want to say that, like, when you go into a tournament with,
it's what you're signing up for, right? Like,
yeah, like
you're literally signing up to try to win, and then you're getting upset when people actually try to win.
And here's the other thing is, like, when you have this mindset and like you have this bad attitude, like it comes off. People can see it. Like you're not good for the game. You're significantly worse than the game than net decking will ever be by having this really bad attitude. And like, honestly, I just get rid of it. Like, if you want to have fun, like let me be very clear to you. Like, Mardu existing makes it easier for you to brew a deck because you have to beat less decks. Right. It doesn't make it harder for you.
It's very weird. I think in general, this kind of attitude is basically, it comes from people who both want to win, but don't. But what they really mean by wanting to win is they want to be smarter than everyone else. Yeah. You know what I mean? I want to win, but I want to do it without any outside assistance. And I want to be great, but I also think I should be smarter than, millions of people working on these deck lists in kind of a hive mind.
So Michael, what he kind of asks, he says, not this happens often, but how do you guys deal with stuff like this? How do you, Michael?
Well, mostly I just kind of recognize that for what it is, which is someone's frustration with, I mean, I guess just saltiness in general kind of falls into this category sometimes. But when someone is like really complaining about every play you make or the deck you're playing or whatever you're drawing, that kind of stuff, I don't know. It doesn't usually get to me. I think back to, the saltiest person I ever played against, and
we were talking about him the other day.
Yeah, it was great. But I think of it I just really try not to let it get to me too much. It's hard to say like exactly what you can do. If someone is frustrating you, I would try to like detach yourself from what they're saying a little bit and just like look at the board state and evaluate that. Try to make the game very mechanical.
Yeah.
I think like if it's getting to you in terms of like upsetting you physically and impacting your ability to play well, just try to like basically shut it out and just focus on the board state rather than trying to juggle like appeasing an opponent who won't be appeased. Yeah. Right? Like if you're playing Mardu and they don't want to play against Mardu, there's nothing you can do that's going to make them happier. Right? Yeah. Like they've made the decision to be mad. You are not a contributing factor to that. So just ignore them. Like honestly, if someone wants to, we've all met these people before, and I have a hard time believing that anyone you interact with is going to judge you negatively for like not pandering to a whiner.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on how I like to handle this. The first one is just like being positive. Like if there's a person being negative around you, like be the positive person, right? Like be the type of person that you want to play against just all of the time, right? Because the more of that there is, the more likely that other people are going to see that and they're going to mirror that. The second thing is like if the player's like upsetting you that much, like to the point where like you literally can't play Magic, then they're creating a negative tournament experience, and you should call them out on it. Be like, hey man, like I'm bringing my deck, you brought your deck, like let's just play Magic and play. Yeah, so see who wins.
I like the idea of being positive. What I would say is if it starts going past the level where you can just like, if it's really getting hard to ignore, I mean, at an FNM, I'm probably not going to call a judge and try to like, get them, to force my opponent to shut up or whatever. But at like a Grand Prix, I think that would be an appropriate response. And in general, I just think like it's not your obligation to make the people around you happy, especially when their standards for happiness are not like based in reality.
Yep.
Right. Like just play Magic to the best of your ability. If someone wants to be upset, they're just going to be upset. And if the only way they're not going to be upset is going 3-0 against, standard colorless Eldrazi, blue-green Crush of Tentacles, and Aetherflux Reservoir Storm, if that's the only way they're going to be happy, that's like pretty hard. They're just not going to be very happy.
Let's go on to our next segment, which is hashtag always improving. First of all, thank you so much for letting us discuss that. We really appreciate it. Hashtag always improving is the point of this podcast. We believe if we're not getting better, we're getting worse. We want to be doing what we can all the time to be trying to improve and do that with you. We believe that Magic is a journey, and we want to be taking an active part in our own journey to try and get better. So this week, my hashtag always improving moment will be to not say hashtag always improving stuff during the Would That Be Good segment. We'll see if that works out. Michael, what did you do to try and improve at Magic this week?
I mean, I'm just still grinding away here for Las Vegas. Just trying to lock in on decks. Feel pretty good about Legacy. Modern is modern for better or worse. So working on things here and trying to get things squared away. But I also got to take a couple of days as a break, hang out with my family, watch my brother graduate from college. So I had a really nice weekend. Got to eat a lot of good food, hang out with my brother and his girlfriend, who I like both of them very much.
Awesome.
Had a really good time. So I've had a really good last few days.
Yeah, so the podcast had an always improving moment. I just want to give a shout out to our technical producer, Mason, who is now getting paid for every episode he does of Constructive Criticism and limited time only. So worked out some negotiations to get Mason a little bit of money for the work that he puts in, and we really, really appreciate that work. So thank you so much to Mason.
Yep, well deserved. Well deserved.
Absolutely. Also, I have a life moment. So tomorrow is 6 years of the day that I started dating my wife. So, I used to shout out my wife all the time on the show and just talk about how much I love her. But she is just an amazing mother, and I'm very glad that I get to spend the time that I get to spend with her. And so I just want to give her a shout out this week. 6 years is 66% of my adult life. I'm 27. Like 6 years is a long part of that.
Oh man, you're counting 18 as being an adult? Wow.
Yeah, that's true. Like if I count 21, like it's like my whole adult life.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure my adult life has started yet. So
fair enough.
We'll get there when we get there.
But I really love Devonair and really appreciate her, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank her for everything that she does and let her know how much I love her. So I love you, Devonair. So as far as Magic goes, I have been preparing for the GPV Legacy testing. I did a little bit of testing with Matt. I was going to be streaming that testing, and then my computer exploded. So, that was great. But yeah, I kind of got to work on some stuff with Matt, figured out the mana base a little bit better and stuff, and, along those lines. And it's going well. I don't know how prepared you can be for a Legacy GP, but
play what you want to play, show up, and hope you play against decks you mostly understand.
That you wanna play against. Yeah. And then we also had a team meeting for our constructive criticism testing team yesterday. That I think that we got a little bit of buy-in again onto the testing team, and hopefully that's helpful for the next year of Magic, and we can get to more people to more GPs, get more people qualified for the Pro Tour, and really turn this year where a couple of people got silver into a year where we get more people in silver and really get us closer to our end goals, whatever those may be. So really exciting stuff on that. Should we go on to our next segment?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so every week on the show, we invite people who are constructive critics of the show. So those are the people who donate $5 or more per month on Patreon to submit a deck doctor. So on the deck doctor, we read the deck list, we talk about it, and we give kind of what we think we would change, what we like about it, stuff like that. Michael, why don't you go ahead and read this deck list?
All right. So this deck list is 4 Dynavolt Tower, 3 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Chandra Flamecaller, 4 Attune with Aether, 3 Magma Spray, 4 Harnessed Lightning, 1 Sweltering Suns, 3 Censor, 1 Essence Scatter, 2 Negate, 4 Disallow, 4 Glimmer of Genius, 1 Anticipate, 1 Pull from Tomorrow, 1 Commit to Memory, 1 Dissenter's Deliverance, And then let's see, there are 22 lands, those being 2 mountains, 2 islands, 3 forests, 3 lumbering falls, 8 combined fast lands, 4 Spirebluff Canal, 4 Botanical Sanctum, 4 Aether Hub. And I think that is it. And then the sideboard is 1 Dispel, 1 Essence Scatter, 1 Tears of Valakut, 3 Longtusk Cub, 4 Sylvan Advocate, 2 Negate, 2 Radiant Flames, and a single Chandra Flamecaller.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on this? Like, where do you see Temur Tower right now?
Well, it's interesting. I'm not completely sure why I'm playing the card Dynavolt Tower. That is my main issue. So Dynavolt Tower was really sweet before because it basically single-handedly made you 100-0 against 4-color Saheeli. And that was really cool. But now that we're in a metagame where, people aren't allowed to do that anymore, it doesn't seem especially good against Aetherworks Marvel. It's probably okay in that it picks off their Rogue Refiners or Whirler Virtuosos or whatever. It's probably kind of okay against Black, Green, and Mardu, but not great in either matchup. It just I'm not sure what matchups I'm windmill slamming that card on and thinking, oh, this is how I'm going to win this game.
So for me, I really appreciate some of the one-ofs in this deck. I really like the one of Anticipate. I really like the one of Descender's Deliverance. I would personally cut a Censor for a second Sweltering Suns. And then outside of that, I like the one of Pull from Tomorrow. I'm curious. I have tried Commit to Memory a few times, and I haven't liked it. So I'm interested to. Do you have any experience with this? I've tried it in blue red and didn't like it.
Yeah, I've played it a few times. It's interesting. It's slow, but it's a lot like Heroes Downfall.
Okay.
It's expensive, but it's sort of. I would think that it sort of replaces Cast Out, if that makes sense. So it doesn't cycle. Every once in a while you can flash back the backside, so it's probably a little worse than Cast Out, but not always, right? There's some upside sometimes in that you can obviously commit to memory and Aetherworks Marvel to and it actually puts it away rather than letting them get an activation first. You can put something in their library in response to them shuffling. So yes. You can Heroes Downfall something that way. It's a little more flexible than a lot of the spells in this deck, and that's one of the things I like actually, because one of my big issues with decks of this style right now is just that you have a lot of cards that are really good situationally, but a lot of them are very narrow. There are a lot of matchups where Magma Spray just doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Right. There are probably some matchups where Dynavolt Tower doesn't really actually do anything. And you can sort of mitigate that with cycling, but I do appreciate having 1 or 2 cards that, while they're probably rarely, you're never going to play a Commit to Memory and say, oh, look at how insanely mana efficient this was. But yeah, you can always play it, and there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, one thing that I will say that I do like this deck list is it looks tuned. It looks like you know what cards you want, why you want them, and things like that. And there's a lot to be said for that. This looks like a person that's played a lot of this deck. I believe this is Paul's deck, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that he actually just has played a lot of this deck.
Yes.
And that there's a lot to be said for that. I don't believe in sunk cost, so I wouldn't play this deck because you've played a lot of it. In exchange for not being willing to learn a new deck. However, if this deck is good, you have played a lot of it, and you can understand things and lines in this deck that you wouldn't have because of that. That is a definite positive, and it looks, by looking at the deck list, like some of that happened.
Yeah, I like in general. I have liked Attune with Aether in the Dynavolt Tower shells. I feel like you get a lot more out of Dynavolt Tower getting to play Attune with Aether than not. The question is just always finding the right balance of sort of early game bridge cards to these late game bombs, right? Because if you get to the part of the game where you're playing Glimmer of Genius, you're playing Torrential Gearhulk, you're playing Chandra Flamecaller or whatever, and your opponent isn't getting to do that kind of stuff, or you have disallow up a lot of the time, the game is mostly just over. And it's just a question of how we get there.
I like the sideboard plan a lot in this sideboard too. Having 3 Longtusk Cubs with basically no creatures in the main, as well as 4 Sylvan Advocates plus 2 Radiant Flames for the the aggro matchups. Like there's a clear sideboard identity to this deck that I really do appreciate. Like I said, I would personally cut a Censor for a Sweltering Suns in the main, but honestly, I really like this sideboard. I'm interested to why Tears of Volakut is in the deck specifically. I wonder if there's more Spellquellers running around, but like this can't be stopped by Spellqueller. Like this can be stopped by Spellqueller, I should say.
Well, but it also kills Spellqueller specifically, right? Like it
Sure.
kind of goes both ways. My thought is you're probably okay against Spellqueller as a whole. I wonder about playing. I like access to maybe a couple more Dissenter's Deliverances.
Sure.
I really like that card in this style of deck because it's a very powerful linear answer that also cycles cheaply.
Yes.
And I think it sort of fits the mold of what I'm looking for in an early game card. This is not a deck I've played a ton with, but my inclination is sort of along the same lines as Spencer. I think I want access to like a little more on the sweeper side of things and a little bit less 1-for-1 removal in the main deck. But I really like the sideboard as well.
That Sweltering Suns is a huge boon for this deck too, because it really allows like the matchups where you don't want that effect to just be able to cycle it. Like this is the deck that gets a lot out of it. I think that Glimmer specifically, or sorry, not Glimmer, Dynavolt Tower specifically makes it so that like your Sweltering Suns like can really sweep the board.
Right, because you can just clean it up then with the Dynavolt Tower. I agree with that for sure. I think that's true. So I wouldn't mind like another one of those. I think I may be less excited about Magma Spray than I have been in the past, with it looking like Zombies is taking a little bit of a dive here. But that's just my impression. I like the sideboard a lot. I like being able to side in a bunch of guys that live through Radiant Flames. I mean, a lot of the time you're going to be able to cast Radiant Flames for 2, or your Long Tusk will survive it, and your Sylvan Advocate. Like that's cohesive to me.
Yeah, this sideboard looks really good. Like it has a very clear identity, which I really appreciate. So, yeah, I think there's not a lot of changes that I would make. I also think that this is one of those decks that, I mean, your deck looks tuned, so that's probably why I don't want to mess with too much of it. I'm interested in to see how good commit is. I would cut a Censor for a Sweltering Suns. But I think the sideboard looks rock solid, and you should be. I mean, this looks really good. You should be proud. So.
I agree with most of that.
So, let's go on to our card of the week. So our card of the week is Death Shadow. So, for Grixis Death's Shadow deck in the top 8 of the Modern Open this weekend. I don't think we've ever talked about Death Shadow before, and as like a card of the week. What makes this card of the week? Like, what is going on here?
It's just really powerful. Like a lot of the Grixis deck is really cohesive. Like I would say the Jund deck does some really powerful things. The Grixis deck is just like all the cards that you're sort of like, hey, if I were to play Grixis Death Shadow, this would probably go in the deck. You're like, oh, they all work so well together. This is so cool, right? Because you're playing like Street Wraith with guys that have Delve, so that's sweet. You're playing Thought Scour with Snapcaster Mage and Kolaghan's Command and guys that have Delve, so that's sweet. Your mana base naturally leans a little more like fetch shock heavy in these Grixis style decks. It works well with kind of all components of this. I don't know. The Grixis deck is just like, it's really clean. Basically, the deck list has hardly changed at all since Michael Majors like invented it on a stream. The deck is like 2 cards different in the main deck from the one he played, off the top of his head. And I think that says, it means there might be room for improvement, but it also says that like things in that deck just make sense. Right, like
I think the deck is clean. I think the way you said it was kind of perfect. And Death Shadow, I mean, one of the huge things that we wanted to do, right, is we wanted to play things like Stubborn Denial, right? Like when we were like, let's do Bug. Like Bug seems like a great color combination. Like we get Tarmogoyf and we get Stubborn Denial, right? Like this deck gets the same thing, right? Like it's like either Grimdark Angler or Tassiger and then Stubborn Denial, Snapcaster Mage to flash it back, like Snapcaster Mage for your Thoughtseize and your Inquisitions that you're already playing. Like it's kind of perfect. And Death Shadow as a card fits so well into everything that the deck is already trying to do, more so than things like Delver did. This deck's not that different from some of those Delver decks that they were playing like not that long ago, except it gets to play more creatures.
Well, and it's just better. I mean, Death Shadow in Modern is just like way better than Delver.
Yes.
Your spell
100%.
count can't quite get high enough for Delvers to actually flip that much. And you can't play the kind of like mana denial that makes Delver so punishing in Legacy.
Yeah.
But I think Death Shadow does the same thing in that it effectively plays mana denial by playing threats that are way above rate. So rather than actually like dazing and wastelanding your opponent out of the game, what you're doing is just crushing them on mana efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. If I play a Tasigur and then I play a 7/7 Death Shadow for a combined 2 mana, it's really hard for your opponent to like answer that without spending way more. And then you throw in the Thoughtseizes and like the Snapcaster Mage just to grind, and you just have this deck of super efficient threats, right? It's kind of like it's like Eldrazi Delver, right? It's like we took Delver and then we were just like, we're gonna kick things up a notch.
Yeah. It's
you get to be the best Fatal Push deck, and you're also oddly pretty good against Fatal Push because you have, a combination of Stubborn Denials and creatures that just can't get Fatal Push. So it's interesting. It's just in a good spot.
How many different viable Death Shadow decks are there right now outside of Grixis?
I think the Jund one is okay. It's different. There are metagames where I could imagine wanting to play it. I think that's honestly mostly it. I don't know.
You don't like the Renegade Rallier versions?
Well, those I would classify as Jund, right? I mean,
sure,
they're just Jund, but playing Renegade Rallier. I'm not convinced that Godless Shrine is worth it in general. I don't know that. My experience, at least recently, has been that the post-board games don't come down to Lingering Souls as much as maybe they used to. A lot of Liliana Last Hope sometimes is its Staticaster running around.
Yeah.
And just playing against the Snapcaster Mage is so much more. Snapcaster Mage can just outgrind a Lingering Souls almost on its own. So
between and Kolaghan's Command, it really has the ability to put in a lot of its own work.
Yeah, so I think that like the Lingering Souls are maybe less good than people initially had thought they were. Stubborn Denial is maybe better than people initially thought it was, which is hard to believe because I think people always thought that was really good. And then Temur Battle Rage is maybe a little bit less good in like the mono Death Shadow metagame because it's so hard. You get Thoughtseized so much. Modern is in a really weird place right now where you get Thoughtseized like, I mean, it feels like an average of 3 times a game. You just get thoughts like every game, both players get Thoughtseized basically. So that's interesting. And I think that it makes Snapcaster Mage better than it has been before. Just because it's such an insane top deck when you're getting Thoughtseized all the time. I think it also makes Serum Visions a little bit better than it had been before, just because you can sort of, in sort of the same way that Brainstorm works, right? Like you can actually sometimes having something on top of your deck right now is better than having it in your hand.
Sure.
And that's a little bit unusual, but I think that's just where we're at in Modern right now.
Yeah, I mean, and there have been metagames before where Jund was super dominant, where you could expect to get Thoughtseized or Inquisition a lot, right? Like,
yes, but right now, like I think between actual Abzan, actual Jund, Grixis Death Shadow, Jund Death Shadow,
and just Grixis Control and
right. I mean, but you're probably looking at about 40 to 50% of most metagames.
Yeah, I think that the format
like
has just switched,
decks,
right?
And they're they're 6+ Thoughtseized decks too. These are not like 4 Thoughtseized decks.
But it's not. I mean, the format used to be all bolt decks, right? So it's just kind of switched. Right. It's just the current most efficient way to deal with the opponent's best threat, which right now is usually Death Shadow. So because of that, it's just switched off from being
Fatal Push being the same color as Thoughtseize is just big game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so hard to justify not playing black in this format. It is so hard to justify.
Yeah.
It's that, and then
they could fix it really quick by putting Swords to Plowshares in standard.
Yeah, I mean that would beat Death Shadow specifically. That card is single-handedly the reason Death Shadow isn't playable in Legacy. It would be completely fine if Swords to Plowshares wasn't a card. But so, it's.
Shall we move on to our next segment?
Yeah, to a format not dominated by Death Shadow.
Yeah, so our next segment is our power ranking. So every week on the show, we like to give you the decks that are doing well at given tournaments. So typically we do power rankings by giving them points for finishes. Legacy, we don't usually do that unless there's like a Legacy GP or something like that. We will do it during those times. But other than that, we have moved to using MTG Goldfish. The reason for this is because using a bunch of classic data, while really awesome and fun, is probably not what you, as a person who's going to be playing a lot of Legacy, will see. It's more likely that it will be closer to something like the top decks from MTGO.
Yeah. I totally agree with that, and I think just in general, like classic data tends to lean towards people wanting to play what they want to play, like. But I don't think it necessarily typically reflects the best decks in the format. It's just not a high stakes enough event for that to be the case.
All right, so coming in at number 6, we have Elves. We are taking Black Red Reanimator off this list because I got tricked while I was driving, and I didn't realize that Mason just wanted us to talk about Elves. But let's talk about this Elves deck. So, have we both played a lot of this? I played a lot of this deck. Have you played a lot of this deck?
No, I haven't played a lot of Elves. I was briefly considering it, but it just isn't really my speed. So what do you like about Elves?
So one of the things that I like about Elves is the overall number of lines that you get while playing the deck. Like, you have so many decisions, and how you sequence can really dictate how the game plays out, for good or bad. Because like, if you make a mistake, like it could really cost you, but it makes you feel really good for when you play correctly, right? Like, when you make the correct decisions with the deck, it feels really good because it feels like you can't lose.
I think this deck is sweet. I don't know that I think it's good.
Oh, I think that if this deck was easier to play, it would be one of the best decks and a format defining deck in Legacy.
Yeah, my ultimate problem is that I think this deck is really flexible. I think it can do some powerful things, but I think ultimately you are sort of bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Oh, I completely disagree.
Interesting.
I think you can be a degenerate combo deck or an aggressive aggro deck. I think that you are one of the best decks at doing either one.
Right. I end up feeling like a lot of the time it falls just short of being a true combo deck, and just short it sort of depends on how you imagine it straddling that line, right? Like, I would imagine that people who like Elves mostly feel like it does a good enough job at both to be able to be flexible and switch roles, and people who don't like it feels like it's, being flexible and switching roles just actually means you're not quite good enough at either.
Okay. I don't think that it ever wants to switch roles, but I think that it has a backup plan. I don't think that that's a problem. I think that that's a benefit for the deck. Like, because you can so easily just like be like there's just not that many creatures, right? So like, when you go wide in Legacy, you can go wide with like very few creatures and like really get the beat down on. And then against the decks where that doesn't happen, right, where like they're creature decks, like they just usually can't interact with you on an axis that you can really, so you're able to just kind of go off. I typically find that, like, and I think this reason that so many people find the deck appealing is that your wins come from playing correctly, and you get very rewarded when you do so.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely too. It's a very unique deck, right? I mean, it's like the only deck that really gets to play Gaea's Cradle. It uses Deathrite Shaman in a really different way from most of the other Deathrite Shaman decks. You get to do all these cool things with Wirewood Symbiote. Like, Elves is very appealing. It's very interesting. It's very different.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's go on to the next deck that we have here. So coming up next, we have Sultai Delver. Is that you might have to prepare for right now in Legacy? This is a Leovold Delver deck. It's Garmag Angler, Leovold, Tarmogoyf, Fatal Push, Hymn to Torok, Daze. Like, one thing that I'm looking at is I'm clicking through a few lists, and it looks like these decks very much are not on the Stifle plan right now. You never seem to know anymore. I think that Sultai has usually not been on that plan.
It's usually not playing Stifle. I would say that the list that we have up is a little bit atypical in that I think the majority of lists are playing Liliana the Veil and Tombstalker in sort of the Leovold Gurmag Angler slots. But this is really at its heart, like this is like the child of Shardless and Delver, right? You're a Hymn to Turok deck that is really flexible. You're good. I think you're pretty good against the other Delver decks. You have Abrupt Decay. The Hymns are good in those matchups, in my experience.
Why
Tarmogoyf
play?
is good in those matchups.
Why play Delver though? Like, why not just have a couple of Shardless agents and some Snapcaster mages? Like, I legitimately don't understand why Delver is in these decks sometimes.
So I think it's mostly because Daze and Wasteland just don't. I mean, you literally can't play Daze. So if you play Shardless, you get into just much more mid-rangey games.
That's not true, because the blue-white Stoneforge Mystic decks play Daze and Snapcaster Mage all of the time.
No, so you can play Daze if you just play Snapcasters, but you literally cannot play Daze and Shardless Agent, right?
I'm sorry, I was not talking about Shardless Agent. Did I say that? I was talking about Baleful Strix.
Oh, okay. So Baleful Strix would probably make.
I apologize for that. That
worries.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So Baleful Strix would probably make like your Grixis Delver matchup a little bit better. It would probably make it's good against Gurmag Gangler, but I think in general Delver is good in the kind of combo matchups. It's really good in the matchups where you need to apply pressure. Like, it's hard to. I think that there's just some natural tension between like Wasteland Daze and Baleful Strix.
Because it's so heavy on your mana?
No, not that it's so heavy on your mana. I think that like they're all good cards, and you could hypothetically play some number of them all in the same deck. But I think the idea is if I'm going to play Daze and Wasteland and him, I want threats that get my opponent dead.
Okay.
Because if you him someone and then play a Baleful Strix, like we've generated a lot of card advantage, but we're trying to play a very different game than the kind of game that like Tarmogoyf and Delver of Secrets suggest you want to play. Like if we're going to play Delver and Tarmogoyf, I think then we're trying to use those as tempo cards, not as control cards.
But my problem is that this has always felt to me more like a Deathrite Shaman deck than a Delver deck. I could be wrong here. It's just, and it could be how I tend to lean when I play Magic, right? So that could be a me problem. I might need to adjust how what my play patterns look like according to the deck.
No, it definitely is. This is the buggiest Delver deck by a lot. It feels sometimes like every other bug deck. Like, I would say when you're losing with this deck, it usually is feeling like a bad mid-range deck.
It usually feels like you're drawing Delvers. So here's, I've played this deck. I played this deck to try and decide between this and like. I honestly, if you are a listener and you can leave a comment on this video or on this podcast and let us know, like, why Delver? Why not things like Snapcaster Mage and Baleful Strix? Like, I actually want to know. It's something that I don't know. Michael, it sounds like you agree that this is more of a Deathrite Shaman deck than a Delver deck anyway.
So it's true. I think that this deck is a little more flexible in role. Like, it kind of depends on what your hand looks like. And I think that depending on how you build your sideboard, this deck can be very powerful. But one of the things I do notice with this deck is that it's the same people 5-0ing with it all the time. And what that tells me is that you probably just need a really cohesive boarding plan. You need to understand your role in all these different matchups based off of your hands and stuff like that. It's like if you think of Rug Delver as like the most Delvery Delver deck, right? This is kind of the least Delvery Delver deck. You still Delver people sometimes, but that's not like plan A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
You can play sort of a mid-range game with it, and I think that can give you really good flexibility if you are good at identifying how that works and what you're looking for in hands and how to get there. But for those of us who maybe haven't played this deck a ton, I don't think it picks up quite as naturally as a lot of the other Delver decks. I think it's like it requires you to have more matchup specific knowledge with regards to how you're playing your cantrips, how you're playing your early creatures, what you're looking for in hands, that kind of stuff. And in a format where you get so much control over, like when you actually have brainstorm and ponder and all these ways to shape your hand in the early game, I've certainly noticed that there are a number of decks that I can tell that the deck isn't bad because when the cards come together in the right combinations, I'm winning very easily, right? I mean, if you just get to like Delver into him into Wasteland Days or whatever, the game is over. You're not going to lose games where you do that. But if you're having trouble figuring out exactly when you're supposed to be trying to do what, this deck is a little bit less like one theme than some of the other Delver decks.
I agree. And it could be incorrect of me, but like my natural reaction is I want to lean into what my deck is telling me, and I don't think this deck does a really good job of doing that.
Yeah, and I agree with that a lot. And I also I think that makes this an interesting choice, but it's not the first Delver deck I would suggest someone play.
Yeah. Let's go on to our next deck. We have Ad Nauseam Tendrils coming up next. Though this is the Ad Nauseam Tendril Storm deck. Michael, have you gotten a chance to play with this recently? Being on the testing team with Matt, I would assume that you've gotten some exposure to this.
I mean, I've played this deck a fair bit. I don't love it because I hate the Grixis Delver matchup, and I think most people do. But
why do you hate it? What do you hate about that matchup?
It's just bad. Grixis Delver. I mean, we can look at it when we get to the Grixis Delver list, but it's really bad. And right now, this feels like Grixis Delver the format.
So, is there anything that you could do as an Ad Nauseam player to maybe fix that matchup?
I like the. I think that the Rite of Flame lists with Burning Wishes. I think that. I mean, championed by like Bryant Cook and known as Tess or the Epic Storm. I think those are better positioned right now. I also think that deck is a little bit harder to play, but things I don't like about this deck right now is I feel like you're sort of soft to Deathrite Shaman. I think you're soft to Cabal Therapy. You're very reliant on Past in Flames, and that card is insanely powerful, but I'm not sure it's where I want to be at the moment. I think this deck is still good if you are great with it, but I don't think it's a good time. I'm not sure it's ever a good time, but I especially think right now is not a good time for marginal storm pilots, and I certainly fall into that category.
Sure. I don't play this deck specifically because like I find this deck difficult to play, and similar to Elves, it's not very forgiving of misplays. I do think that there are metagames where this deck is just going to run people over. I, like Michael, I just don't think in the world of Grixis Delver that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I know that that's the matchup I want to play the least with this deck. I know it's the matchup Matt wants to play the least with this deck. If you look at Grixis Delver in the sideboarded games, it's literally just like Young Pyromancer, Delver of Secrets, and 70 hate cards or whatever. It's just the games get ugly after sideboarding, and I don't know that that's like a fixable problem.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stack up well in that matchup.
All right, coming up next, we have Blue-White Control. Please stop calling this deck Miracles.
I mean, it's truly miracles. Your
that
miracles
it's still
are
around.
Well, it's a miracle that it's still around. Your miracles are also much more frequently just actual miracles.
Yeah, they're just often, oh, look, a miracle.
Yeah, like it's just actually like that. How do you feel about this deck, Spencer?
I think that you could. I don't think that you could convince me that it's correct to play the Monastery Mentor version. I think if I'm going to play this many cantrips in a blue-white deck, I'm going to be on Monastery Mentor.
You're going to main deck at least one?
I would main deck more than one Monastery Mentor in this deck.
Okay.
I would be Monastery Mentor. I think minimum 2.
I think 2 is the number if you're going to play it.
And I think that between Portent, Ponder, and Brainstorm, that's just a better place to be right now. I think that it's just too easy to stop that one of Entreat the Angels, and I would rather have more. being 3 mana instead of all of my mana is like pretty big game, especially in a deck that like will often play things like Flusterstorm or actual Counterspell. Just these cards that can really put me in a different place than if I'm playing the Entreat the Angel version. I know the one that we have on our screen plays like Vendilion Click Entreat. I don't hate a one of Vendilion Click in the deck still, but I mean, I'm going to be if I'm playing this deck, I believe Mentor is correct. There's a pretty interesting legacy community on Cockatrice for competitive legacy. You're gonna play against a lot of the same players a lot, and there's a couple of guys that like to play this deck quite a bit. And honestly, like, I'm not sure how I feel about the deck right now. I don't know. What do you think?
It's so hard to say. I'm curious to see if we will get like a more solid innovated list following Las Vegas.
That could be true.
But I have not seen a list that I love for this, and it's really not my style.
I will say that I
want to register Portent.
I believe in Blue Eye Control, like a lot. I think that Blue Eye Control has the tools in Legacy to be a tier 1.5 to tier 1 deck. My only concern is like, is what you're doing better than Esper Deathblade or Jeskai Blade or any of the Blade variants? Like, is it?
Yeah.
Can you definitively say that what you're doing is more powerful and like more meaningful in the games?
Well, I think of a couple of things that I like about these lists. So I like how many basics you get to play.
Yes,
being like very base blue allows you to play. This deck is playing 7 basic lands, and so some decks can play like 3 or 4, but can't really fetch them. This deck can legitimately just actually only fetch basics. You can just play an entire game of Magic where you fetch like island, plains, and that's all you need. Yeah. So that is really powerful. I think being like mostly wasteland proof is a big boon for a deck like this. The problem is whether or not you can reliably win games with like a couple of Snapcaster Mages, a couple of Vendilion Clicks, and a couple of Jaces. And I'm not convinced that the answer to that question is yes. Matt and I have played against this deck a bunch, and there have been games where I think we've been outdrawn by like 20 cards and won fairly easily, which just is a weird experience to have because I don't think I've ever played games of Magic like that before.
I've gotten some testing in Legacy, and I honestly like. I haven't lost to this deck yet. I understand that it's doing well. I'm starting to wonder, is it a numbers thing? Or like all of the people that owned this deck in Legacy that love Legacy, are they all just playing this now and like getting some 5-0s, or is the deck actually good?
So I think it could be that. I think it's also that some of the Miracles players who've picked this up are extremely talented. So sort of like both some numbers, but also that the best players who are playing this deck are just very good at playing Magic. And if you like, my guess is that if you haven't played Miracles before, this deck is enough worse than Miracles that it's likely not great. But that if you were a great Miracles player already, it has enough similarities that your skill set is just well utilized.
Yeah. Coming in at number 1, we do have Grixis Delver. They've kind of converged into a very similar style to the thing that you and I have been advocating for the last couple of months, right? That young Pyromancer version with maybe 1 to 2 True Name Nemesis. Just kind of exactly how we thought. They have moved closer to Stifles and away from Cabal Therapies in the main, which is different than what we've advocated for, but it's something to note.
That feels more like personal preference and kind of a metagame call, right? I mean, the Cabal Therapies are really good sometimes, but some people want to build this deck as something much closer to Rug Delver.
Sure.
And I can understand the appeal of that.
So I think I just saw a list not too long ago with a 0 Gitaxian Probe in this deck. How do you feel about that?
I think if you're going to lean harder on Stifle and less on Young Pyromancer, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I think if you're playing Young Pyromancer and Cabal Therapy and you're, trimming on Gitaxian Probes, you are clinically insane.
Okay.
Right? I mean, I think that it's so hard to talk in generalities when the builds break down so specifically. Like, it makes sense to me that if I'm playing a bunch of Stifles, Probe is like a lot less important.
Sure. I mean, here's the thing: is that like the Grixis Silver deck makes up 12.13% of the Legacy metagame online right now for 5.0 lists, and the next best deck is 7%. The next after that is 6, then 5, then 4, then 4, then 3.6, 3.6, 3.6, 3.6. Like, all the way down to 4-color control. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 decks like in Legacy right now that you really have to prepare for, and that's not even including just things that are a little bit spun off, right? So, I mean, the next up decks are Grixis and Blue-Red Delver, which are just kind of offshoots of some of the decks that are already in there.
Right. I mean, Grixis is just Grixis Delver with Baleful Strixes, basically.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I think that some of them have moved a little bit away from that. I think that they're more like young Pyromancer.
Yeah.
Oh no, this one is
I
like
saw a
straight
couple
up
of, like,
4-color Baleful Strix. You're right.
Yeah, I saw some that are like actual like young Pyromancer decks. Like, there was a 5.0 list from the other day with 4 Gurmag Angler, 4 young Pyro as the only creatures. But I think the majority of the lists that are classified just as Grixis are basically just straight swap Delver for Baleful Strix,
Yeah,
modify your spell package a little bit. There you go.
This one by Din Attest is actually really sweet. Really, really sweet. So, yeah, I think that this format is awesome right now. Nothing is really that dominant. Like, Grixis Delver is Grixis Delver, but
so so just to get into a little bit on like why Ad Nauseam Tendrils scares me a little bit right now. Just look at the sideboard of the list that we have on screen. And in that matchup, like, this is actually one of the least hateful sideboards I've ever seen from a Grixis Delver list. Probably just recognizing that it doesn't actually have to be that hateful. But in a boarded game, you're going to be playing against Grafdigger's Cage, since presumably you're playing Past in Flames, right? Double Flusterstorm, double Red Blast, an extra therapy, a surgical, and probably a Vendilion Click. In addition to Deathrite Shaman, which is just good against you, 2 main deck Cabal therapies, Force, Wasteland, and a Quick Clock. A lot of the lists too are playing Stifles. So if they're playing Stifles in the main, they frequently are sideboarding the therapies. So you're playing sideboarded games against like Spell Pierce Daze, Flusterstorm, Surgical, Stifle, Wasteland, Deathrite Shaman. It's just like it's like you just decided you were going to list the cards that are good against Storm and then jammed them in a deck.
Yeah, I think
the sideboarded games are brutal.
Yeah, I think that there's not a lot you can do there. I agree with you. But I will say that let's talk really quick. What deck, if you could take any deck to Vegas, what deck would you be taking?
It's so hard to say. Honestly, even at this point, it's still so hard to say. And I feel like I've played a lot of this format. I feel like if I was good enough with Grixis Delver that I felt like my mirror match was going to be good, I would probably play that.
Yeah, so for me, I was looking at one of our patrons, David, loaned me 4-color control, so I'll be playing that in Vegas. So super shout out to that. By the way, like sending thousands of dollars in Magic cards across the country to some guy that you listen to on a podcast is like pretty intense, and it is greatly appreciated. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, if I were to pick a deck today, I actually think that I would play Punishing Abzan. I think that there's going to be less Storm than I thought there was going to be, and I very much would be interested in playing a deck like that.
So you look at this deck and see Delver Masher, I assume?
I've played the deck a lot. It definitely smashes Delver. You could probably technically convince me to play Bloodbraid Elf Jund.
Yeah,
that would actually not be a terrible thing if you don't expect Storm or
and the thing is, you're not cold, right?
It's like pretty good.
Like you can, I've seen a Willie Edel list where you're main decking like it's like for him 4 Thoughtseize, you have Lilianas, and then he's also main decking some Red Blasts.
Oh, is he playing Jund right now?
Yeah, I can shoot you a list later, but if you search for like 5-0 finishes by Edel,
Punishing Jund?
I forget if he was playing Punishing Fire or not.
Yeah, I think that.
But the most recent list I saw was playing like main deck Red Blast. I mean, I'm sure your game 1 combo matchups are not great, but you know, I've gotten him to Turok before. You lose plenty of games where you just get hemmed and you're like, well, you know, that happened to me.
And one of the reasons that I really like decks like the him decks right now is that's so funny. Somebody mentioned it in chat. Is like there are going to be some number of people that are going to play like Eldrazi Stompy, and I really like to be able to Thoughtseize them and him them in the same game. So like a lot of the decks that I'd be playing are actually playing Thoughtseize in the main. That's one of the things that Matt was really surprised by my list. He's like, "Oh, you're playing Thoughtseize in the main." I'm like, "Yeah, people are going to play Eldrazi at this event. I need Thoughtseize and him if I'm going to win matches."
Yeah, I like that. I'm kind of infatuated with Bant Deathblade. It hits my Bant Eldrazi tendencies, where like you just play this clunky pile that like feels pretty awful as you're playing it, and then you look down and your win percentage is like 70%. I don't know. I just enjoy it. It's so hard. It feels like there are basically like 10-ish decks you could play that are like totally reasonable and all at least good enough, right? And then there's a whole nother tier of decks that are like probably good if you're great with them. It's a fun format. I would not play something that I felt like was insanely soft to Grixis Delver. That's basically the only criteria.
Sure. Well, let's move on to our next segment. So, are you ready for this, Michael?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, as Casey Bloodworth would say. Oh, by the way, super huge shout out to all the people who like were really excited about Manny getting back into Magic. He did well at his first event, and he's looking to continue playing again. And he's like one of my best friends, so it's like really cool to get him back into the game. So all of you keep pumping his ego, and yeah. It's greatly appreciated on my end because I love Manny more than it sounds like you guys do too. And he's always invited on the podcast anytime he wants. I don't think that we'll ever bring on another third co-host again, but that doesn't mean that there's not a guest spot available for him whenever he wants one. So so our next segment is our training grounds. So every week on the show. Oh, actually that's not true. It's Deck of the Week. Which is this week is all you, Michael, because I honestly know I've play tested this deck back in the day when it was the best deck in the format, but other than that, like I don't have a lot of experience playing with this deck, and we're going to talk about Sneak and Show. Michael,
yeah,
let's get right into this. So, give me a simple summary. What is Sneak and Show in Legacy right now?
Okay, Sneak and Show is like it's the idiot deck. I like this deck because there's room for cool plays in like sequencing, but fundamentally the deck, like you could give this to a 6-year-old and they could easily 5-0 a league if the matchups lined up correctly. Like you cast Show and Tell and either put in Sneak Attack, Emrakul, or Gristlebrand. That's it. Sometimes you cast Sneak Attack and just put in Emrakul or Gristlebrand. Like there's nothing more to it. That's the deck.
Yeah, it honestly plays a lot like Twin did in Modern. From like when I was play testing with the deck a lot, it was like this is Twin. Like I'm playing Splinter Twin. Like it is honestly how this deck feels.
So the problem is that you don't, Gristlebrand is not Pestermites. You can just never win a game with like, play a Pestermite and attack them. So yeah, I mean that's
can't realistically win a game that way anyway. But I appreciate the.
Well, okay, but between like Snapcaster and Pestermite, you could like win a game without playing Splinter Twin, right? And they actually got sided out a bunch. So
sure.
The thing here is like you're insanely linear, like linear to a fault, but. That linear game plan is obviously really powerful. You have a ton of so this list is playing. This is a list by JPA93, who plays a lot of Magic Online. I really like his lists if you're looking for something a little bit less stock. He is frequently trying out slightly different cards, slightly different builds. Like this one is playing 2 Simian Spirit Guides and 2 Dazes, with the theory being that the 2 best ways to beat Daze are Daze and Simian Spirit Guide.
Sure.
Which makes sense, right? So if we're trying to beat Delver, we're going to do it by playing a bunch of basics. We can fetch a bunch of basics. Delver can very rarely beat an Emrakul or a Gristlebrand that's in play. And then we're going to try to beat their Dazes with a combination of Spell Pierce, Force of Will, and our own Dazes and Spirit Guides.
So tell me a little bit about this deck. Like, what are the key cards in this deck for you right now, Michael? Like, what are the must-haves? I noticed the list on the screen. It doesn't look like it has Omniscience.
So Omniscience is really good if you think Death and Taxes is going to be a big part of the metagame. But if you think that Death and Taxes is like less well positioned, or you're playing it locally and you're not as concerned about it, you don't necessarily need them. Playing a list like this rather than one with Omniscience. If you play Omniscience, you usually play Cunning Wish, you play like Intuition in the main deck. The deck slows down a lot. I think it makes your Delver matchup worse. So if you decide that like I need to beat Delver and I want a good combo mirror, I really like this deck.
Yeah, shout out to Mason for putting your 45-minute deck tech in the chat.
Oh yeah, so that's about the Cunning Wish version, which is what I played at Louisville. But
yeah, so what are the different versions? Why don't you talk about that really quick?
Okay, so some people play just like I've seen lists with just like 2 Omnisciences in the main. So they're this list, and then you play like 2 Omnisciences and nothing else. I've seen that with like those 2 Omnisciences in the sideboard, and those are really just for Death and Taxes because Show and Tell sucks against Death and Taxes. You put in Emrakul and they put in Karakas, or you cast Show and Tell and they respond with Containment Priest, or you put in Emrakul and they put in Palace Jailer. It's really bad. Like that matchup is just bad, and there's no getting around it. Omniscience helps, but like it helps make it winnable bad instead of like why am I even playing bad?
Sure.
And then there are some lists that play Omniscient, a 3 of Omniscience, a 3 of Grizzlebrand, a 3 of Emrakul, a 3 of Sneak Attack, and then you usually play 3 Cunning Wish, 1 Intuition in the main, 1 Intuition in the board, and that lets you generally Show and Tell an Omniscience. And if you Show and Tell an Omniscience with a Cunning Wish, you can usually kill your opponent at instant speed. I don't want to run through the whole thing. You can listen to the deck tech on that version if you'd like more information on that.
Sure. Let's talk about the current versions that most people are playing right now. What do you think the key matchups are, and what do they look like?
Okay, so this deck is if you want to play this deck, this version will have a better matchup against all the Delver decks. You are just going to be better against him because your combo is more redundant, right? Because you can't draw Sneak Attack Omniscience. The main reason to not play the Omniscience version is because Sneak Attack and Omniscience are pieces that don't work together.
Right.
So you're playing Dazes. Those are really good against him. They're really good against Daze. You're playing Spirit Guides, which let you occasionally ramp out a Sneak Attack or a Show and Tell a turn earlier. So it's very linear. You still get to play a bunch of cantrips. So I think your Delver matchups with this version are going to be at least okay. And that is like the main. If you think you have good Delver matchups, you think you can beat the Delver matchups, I think this deck is a totally reasonable choice.
Yeah, I think that. So I don't have an opinion other than aesthetically pleasing lists, and I really like the ones with like 1 Omniscience. It's like that. It lets you do a lot of things. So Cunning Wish is instant or sorcery, right?
Yeah, only instant.
Oh, it's only instant. Okay, it's interesting. So what are you searching for?
So if you are playing the version with Omniscience and Cunning Wish, there are a few things. Cunning Wish gets, typically in game 1s, it gets Flusterstorm. If you're just casting it naked, so like you haven't comboed off yet, there's no Omniscience in play, you're usually getting a Flusterstorm to try to protect your combo. You are getting Wipe Away to get something off the board that you can't beat for whatever reason. Like sometimes you can like end of turn wipe away a Karakas and then Emrakul them with a Sneak Attack or something like that. You could sometimes get a Kozilek's Return or something along those lines. Those are the main ones, or a Red Blast. Those are the main like 4 you would be getting in a pre-boarded game if you don't have Omniscience in play. If you have Omniscience in play, you are probably getting Firemind's Foresight, which gets an instant with CMC 1, 2, and 3 from your deck into your hand. So then you get Brainstorm and a second Cunning Wish. Sometimes the lists play Impulse, but you brainstorm an Emrakul back on top of your deck from your hand, and then you Cunning Wish for Release the Ants, which you clash. So you both reveal the top card of your deck, and whoever's CMC is higher. If your CMC is higher, basically Release the Ants comes back to your hand, and you can choose to leave the card on top, and it deals 1 damage to them. So you can kill them at instant speed. It was good against like Venser. It's good against like Ashen Rider. It beats Karakas. It beats Phyrexian Revoker. It beats all kinds of stuff like that. It beats Containment Priest. Omniscience is really good against Death and Taxes. That's the matchup where it's best by a lot.
Any tips and tricks you have for people that might be considering picking up these decks?
Basically, like if it looks appealing to you, there's probably not much you're missing. I know that there are some for the normal Sneak and Show decks. I think if you look on YouTube, you can find some really good matches of I think it's Kentaro Yamamoto who won GP Chiba with it last year. You can watch him playing against Death and Taxes to get a feel for what that matchup looks like. But this deck is really powerful. There's a lot of good content for it because it's basically a solved deck at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, there are like 5 or 6 flex slots, but this deck it's very good. It's a totally reasonable choice. If it looks appealing to you, I can guarantee it will play appealing to you. It's very straightforward. Yeah,
this is the deck that there was a time in Legacy where this was just the best deck. So something that I got to play with and against a lot early on. The deck has evolved since then. Like there are people that are still innovating on this deck. So while it's a solved deck, like that just means that when you have those set flex slots, like you get to do a lot with them. Like you get to decide like what matchups are important to you, and then change your deck accordingly.
Yeah, I wanted to be clear. So when I say it's a solved deck, what I really mean is that if you find content from a year ago, it's still going to be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Like obviously Miracles isn't a matchup anymore, but this is a deck where like you can find, it doesn't have to be content from this week. You can find a video of someone playing this deck a year ago, 2 years ago, skip the Miracles matchups, and it's just as good today as it was then.
I think this is great. So thank you so much for sharing that. And that is the deck of the week segment for this week, guys. So thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your insights on that deck. Let's go on to our next segment, which is our training grounds. So every week on the show, we're going to be talking about something that's going to make you better at Magic or life in general. This week is definitely a Magic topic. This is we've been doing less of these lately, and we've actually done this topic before. It's like it has to be like episode like 15 or 16. So it's been, like over 150 episodes. So this week we want to talk to you about the stack and kind of understanding the stack, how it works, what it is, what you can do, and when you can do it. So, Michael, just give them a brief overview. Like, what is the stack?
Well, the stack is basically it's how spells work. It's how they go in, what order they resolve in. That's the stack describes things that are currently being cast but haven't resolved yet.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of go into this thing that I've talked about. I think I talked about it on when I did a guest show on the Spike feed. So I used to work at a store called Oasis Games long time ago. It's a great store. You should check them out, mtgoasis.com. And there would be new players that would come out all the time. And the stack is something that's a little bit harder to explain to them. And so what I would do is I would get a pen. Well, I think I actually grabbed there was actually a stick I would use. But basically, there is the priority stick, right? So you grab a pen, and every time you press priority, you hand that pen to the other person, and then they have to hand it back and forth until you kind of understand what's going on, right? And I think very quickly people understood that when I have the pen, right, or the priority stick, I am able to do something. I'm able to respond and do things. And there are times where I get to hold the stick and say, well, I'm going to actually hold on to this for a second. There are times where I don't. Let's talk about those moments really quick, Michael. What are times where you don't actually have to hand that priority stick off to somebody?
So I would say that the most maybe interesting ways that this works, you can see it with sometimes you'll respond to your own spell. So you can, like, if you've played Storm and Legacy, Infernal Tutor with Lion's Eye Diamond works like that, right? You respond to your own Infernal Tutor by activating Lion's Eye Diamond.
What is this called, by the way?
Holding priority. So basically the idea is that normally you play a spell and then you ask your opponent if they're okay with it resolving. So you're passing them priority. You're passing the stick to them. But sometimes that's not what you're trying to do. Sometimes you specifically want you have a response to your own spell. The other place where this is sort of interesting and a little bit unintuitive, I think, for newer players is, like, I think this is most clear with Planeswalkers. If I cast a Liliana of the Veil and you let it resolve, you can't kill it with Lightning Bolt, right? Because you have to pass the stick back to me for Liliana to resolve. So when Liliana resolves, it's my priority, not yours.
Yeah, this is actually really key for a lot of new players, right? So one of the things that happens is you'll play a Planeswalker, right? They'll let it resolve. They'll learn that you can't Lightning Bolt it, but that also means that if you do something before activating that Planeswalker, right? So if you do anything else before that Planeswalker activates, they do get to respond before you activate that Planeswalker, which in the world of Heroes Downfall, right? Those moments were super relevant.
Sure. I think of the Krosan Grip story, I think, is my favorite.
Go ahead, tell that
my favorite. So I forget the origins of this story now, but someone is playing against someone playing like Show and Tell with Omnisciences or Omnitel back in the Dig Through Time days. And the opponent casts Show and Tell and they respond by floating a mana and allowing it to resolve. Their opponent puts in Omniscience and then they put in like a land or nothing and say, okay, so I have 1 mana floating, and their opponent says, yeah, let's move through my main phase. And they say, Krosan Grip your Omniscience. Right, because in order to clear the floating mana, they've passed priority.
Right.
And I mean, I can't think of a whole lot of examples of things like that happening, but there are some understanding of the stack is important. It's less important to getting your opponent. Very rarely would I say that your opponents like fall into a trap that you set for them like that. But if you don't understand the stack, you will make mistakes that will open up doors for your opponents that shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Well, let's talk really quick about early Magic. So for us, this is early Magic. For you, it might not be. This might be where you're at right now. And I want to talk really quick about doing things at the last moment. This is something that people give you advice, and something that you'll learn pretty quickly is that you gain some amount of advantage by just waiting till the last possible second to do things. When I say waiting till the last possible second, Michael, what do I mean?
Well, waiting until the end, right? You don't cast your combat tricks before your opponent's had a chance to declare blocks. You don't tap all your mana in your pre-combat main phase so that your opponent knows, because it gives your opponent information about the cards in your hand. And I think that one of the first lessons in getting better at Magic is understanding how your play indicates to your opponent what you have. Like how different ways of spending mana, different times of casting spells, sort of starting to get a rudimentary understanding of what information you are presenting to your opponent. And as you get better, trying to figure out how to manipulate the information you're giving your opponent to lead them down the wrong road.
Yeah. So why don't you dive into that a little bit? So like, what do you mean manipulating the information?
So there are times where you might understand, right, that like you're playing limited and you have 5 mana and a Colossopede, and it's what you're going to play. But you might be able to get in, if your opponent has a creature that you think that they're going to value more highly than yours, you might decide that you can attack with one of your creatures, even though you either don't have a combat trick at all, or have one but don't intend to play it, and they may not block or something like that. So you might, give them less information about what you have as opposed to just playing tapping all of your mana for a creature in your pre-combat main. That's like a pretty basic example, but probably one that literally everyone who's ever played Magic can relate to.
Yeah. I think that this can clearly be one of the earliest things that you learn, right? Is that waiting till the last possible moment to do things gives my opponents the most opportunities to make mistakes. It's pretty easy, right? Like, if we're playing a game of chicken, if I win the game of chicken, like,
right,
things go well for me.
Right, hypothetically, that is, that makes sense. Where it gets more interesting is as your opponents improve, timing becomes, again, it goes from basic to basic but different to incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Right.
Why don't we talk really quick about speed? So like, what speed do we do things? Like what uses the stack, Michael?
So pretty much everything uses the stack. I mean, casting spells uses the stack, casting creatures uses the stack. Combat uses the stack in that you're using phases kind of as the stack. So you're passing, like a lot of the time in combat, I think of playing games with Infect, where you're really sort of playing a game of chicken with like, who's gonna twitch first, right? It's like you're kind of dueling with each other, and you're trying to figure out basically who has more bullets in their holster, right? So you're like, okay, well, if I go first, then this and this and this, and if I don't go at all and they don't go at all, then I'm dealing them, 2 Infect this turn from my Noble Hierarch and my Inkmoth Nexus, and next turn we can do this and this, and it just creates these really interesting games where you're trying to figure out exactly what it means to act first or second and which is better, right?
Okay. Well, let's talk really quick. Let's kind of move past this a little bit. Like, when do you have priority?
Well, you have priority when it's your turn to make a decision. What
does that mean?
The most, in simple English, it's the easiest way of explaining it. But
sure,
when you have priority, it means that you can cast a spell or activate an ability. If you do so, unless you would like to hold priority and cast another spell or activate an ability, then priority passes to your opponent, right? So if I cast a spell, then it becomes your priority, right? And that means that you have a chance to respond to my spell by casting your own spell, activating your own ability, or just passing priority back.
Do you find there are times where you yourself are confused about who has priority at certain points?
I remember this happening a lot when I was first playing Magic and hadn't really played like on Magic Online or like in a comp REL setting. I know that like in kitchen table Magic, combat tricks are sort of, when there isn't explicit passing of priority, they can be confusing to use in that players often don't understand exactly how priority is really being passed and how it works, like with relation to blocking and when you can cast spells and what you can respond to.
Sure.
But I find that as I play more, I'm not usually confused about when I'm going to receive priority. The question is more about how you use the priority that you're given.
What do you mean?
In the sense that this comes up most during combat, but it is sort of okay, so if I try to kill a creature now, is it better or worse than waiting till after combat? I think Infect created probably the most interesting sub games that revolved around this.
I think that there are, for those who might be playing something like blue-red control in standard right now, this is something that you really have to think about, right? When you want to do things is a
Right.
huge part of your game plan. If you don't know, right? If you don't know when you want to do things, you probably shouldn't be picking up a deck like that because it's
Well,
like,
yeah,
oh, go
playing
ahead.
against a card like Blossoming Defense in particular, right?
Sure.
And any kind of spell where your opponent can respond to what you're doing. So you're left with a choice where you're trying to read your opponent, right? You're trying to decide, okay, if they have nothing, it's much better for me to harness lightning this Long Tusk Cub now, right? Because they're going to get a trigger, this Grimflayer now. If they have a Blossoming Defense, it's much better maybe for me to do this on end step so I can untap and try to kill it again. And I think that timing and just like how you read your opponent really plays into how you can take advantage of passing of priority.
And I think that it's important to note, like, there are times where you get priority, right? In between every phase, in between every spell. You know, like during all of those times, right? If there's a phase in Magic, you're gonna have priority during it.
Right. And that gives you a lot of choices, right? I mean, if
Yes.
you're thinking about when I actually want to kill this Long Tusk Cub, you may not, you sort of gloss over a lot of things playing in paper because it would be, incredibly difficult to actually play with a chess clock or whatever. But you actually probably have like 7 or 8 distinct chances every turn of every game to cast a spell.
Yeah, and I think Long Tusk Cub is a really interesting one, right? Like, you can respond to its damage trigger. You can respond to its activation trigger. You can respond to it entering combat. You can like, there are so many opportunities to do the things that you want to do. And the same thing is true of your Long Tusk Cub. When do you want to activate it? Do I want to activate it before damage? Do I want to wait till my end step or their end step? Like, where do I want to use this ability of this card that I have in play that basically every time I have priority is a chance for me to activate this card?
Yeah, I think of Blessed Alliance happened a lot the same way. One of the things people would do a lot of the time is, depending on like how many pump spells they thought they were playing against, you would sometimes actually block something, let damage happen, and then in the end of combat, the creature is still considered attacking, and then you would cast Blessed Alliance.
Why don't you
And that
explain that
was something.
interaction really
So
quick?
basically, the creature is still attacking even after damage has been dealt. So you can block
As
a
long as
creature
it's still in combat.
still in combat. So you're in the end of combat phase, and you can block one creature, have it die to damage, then Blessed Alliance away another creature. So that's
After that creature has done you
yes,
damage.
right. So it deals you damage first, but your Blessed Alliance becomes a much better removal spell,
Let's
hypothetically. So that's really
let's
cool.
go
But
really deep for a second, Michael.
okay,
Okay, how does this work? You and I are playing a game of Magic. I attack with my Long Tusk Cub and my Ronus. I have 0 energy, and you have a uh, Sylvan Advocate in play, and you block my Long Tusk Cub.
sure.
Okay, um, and it dies. Okay, my Ronus is still around. It's dealt you 5 damage. What are you saying in this match to kill my Ronus?
So I would say after damage, but while we are still in combat. So you could do it in the combat damage step because damage happens first. So you could say in your combat damage step or in your end of combat step, I'm going to cast Blessed Alliance.
Okay, and then what happens when you do that?
So then basically what effectively happened is I was able to kill the Ronus with Blessed Alliance as opposed to killing the Long Tusk Cub with Blessed Alliance, right?
Why
So-
is that?
So because I had an understanding of how the spell I had interacted with my ability to have priority in different stages of a turn, right? So I think that's like a really cool example where you might see a card as kind of inflexible in that Blessed Alliance a lot of the time gives your opponent a choice, but you can sometimes maneuver a game. You can sometimes, instead of making the inflexible card more flexible, you can mold the game around an inflexible card you have to make it more powerful, right?
The other thing to think about here is we're actually not talking about the stack, right? We're actually talking about phases. Like, this is a phases question, but it's one of the reasons. By the way, huge shout out to
It was Chad. Yes.
yeah, huge shout out to Chad who gave us this topic to talk about this week. So if you're a patron of $25 or more per month, you actually can submit topics for us to talk about on the show. And this is one that was really important to him. And this is one of the questions that kind of came up. Is like, when can I do things? When can I interact with the stack? And that's really important. Like,
Right. I think so. at a pretty basic level, a lot of people, once you've played more than a few games of Magic, you sort of understand how the stack works, right? You understand how things resolve. But I think in general, being cognizant of the timing of your spells and how that affects how they work is maybe a more interesting, broader topic, right? Like how do we use timing to our advantage?
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think that comes up in all kinds of games with all kinds of spells.
let's talk really quick. Let's dive deep on the stack a little bit and talk about the edges to be gained within that, because there are all kinds of things that you can do if you understand matchups to actually help you with the stack. One of the common ones I see that our team has implemented between a few players is Spell Queller in the control matchups out of the sideboard in the control mirror. Now, you might say to yourself, well, Spencer, like if you're putting a Spell Queller into play, like it's just Harness Lightning fodder, right? And while that can be true, what it actually does is it manipulates the stack in a new way. What's going to happen is people are going to port in negates into spells against you, which don't actually interact on the stack with Spell Queller, right? So there's this huge advantage to be gained where you're like, counter your spell with this spell, counter that with the negate, and you're like, Spell Queller. And they like stare at their hand and they're like, oh, this ends the stack. I can't respond to this.
Right. And on the flip side, Spell Queller in particular is interesting in that you
Oh, yeah,
also
go
get
ahead
the
with this.
consideration of what you are spell quellering, right?
Yes.
If you spell queller a more narrow counter, like say you, I mean, it wouldn't be a censor, but say you spell queller, I don't know, a negate or a dispel specifically, you might leave that spell trapped under a spell queller and then be able to play the rest of the game in a way that even if they kill the spell queller, they don't actually get to recast their spell.
Yeah. Also, there's so many times where I've seen people that don't understand, like, where do I do things and how to respond to it. Spell Queller is a really good example of this, right? When do I kill this Spell Queller and where does whatever under it land on the stack? How does that work, Michael?
So basically, right, so let's say they do have a dispel under your spell queller and you cast a Glimmer of Genius. If they cast a Harness Lightning on your spell queller, they're going to be able to counter your Glimmer of Genius with the dispel.
How does that work? Go deep.
And that happens. So that happens because what goes in first will resolve last. So the Glimmer of Genius is on the stack, and your opponent says, "I'd like to respond to that." So they say, "I'm going to Harness Lightning your spell queller," and you say, "Okay, well, I tapped all my mana to cast this Glimmer of Genius, so that's happening."
Yeah.
So they say, "I'd elect to pay 3 energy to kill your spell queller because now the Harness Lightning is resolved." And your spell queller dies, and now they're able to cast the spell that was underneath it, right?
Yeah.
The trigger happens. And because the Glimmer of Genius is still on the stack, because it was the first thing that happened in all of this, whatever spell they cast can target a spell on the stack, obviously. So
yeah, a good way to look at this, similar to how chat had mentioned, when we said stack, they talked about pancakes, right? So the first pancake on your plate is going to be the last one you eat.
Unless you're a psychopath.
Yeah, because it's at the bottom. Because it'll be really hard to eat that pancake first.
Right.
So you have these layers, right, where you have to get to the bottom layer eventually, but like there's things on top of it that you have to get through before you can get to that bottom layer in that bottom pancake.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of other interesting interactions. There was a period of time where Summary Dismissal was a very popular sideboard card. And one of the things I used to like to do was to respond to like a Glimmer of Genius with an Elder Deep Fiend, because it actually like turned off Summary Dismissal as a counterspell. So you could do some really cool things. So because if against this is, I mean, this is very specific, but I think just being cognizant of the cards your opponent could have, there are frequently things like this that exist in a given format. So because Summary Dismissal exiles all spells on the stack, if you respond to a Glimmer of Genius with a spell that you need to resolve, I mean, sometimes even just like a Grapple with the Past to get back an Emrakul, something like that. If you respond to one of their spells with it, Summary Dismissal will counter their own spell as well. Because it's still on the stack when your spell is being countered. So there are some really cool things you can do with timing and the stack. And I think mostly what it comes down to is just like being cognizant of the cards your opponent could have and how they might interact with the cards that you have. Yep. Right. And once you understand some of these interactions, like, don't kill a spell queller with the trigger on the stack, But you could also hypothetically play a game where, say, your opponent was trying to resolve a Glimmer of Genius. You could kill your own Spell Queller with the trigger on the stack. Right? There's all kinds of weird things you could hypothetically do with some of these cards, and just understanding how the stack works in these corner case scenarios, because I think the stack is generally fairly easy to understand. Right? It's like first in, last out is a relatively simple concept.
Understanding that talking stick, priority stick.
Right. That takes 5 minutes and we're mostly good there. But sometimes you have to see a play happen once for it to really be like, oh, wow, that was like way better than what I was. So, say you have a Spell Queller and 3 Harness Lightnings in hand and a Control Mirror.
Sure.
You may well want to, just exile a Glimmer of Genius permanently rather than have a 2/3.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's talk really quick. Talk really quick, because I know this is super basic for a lot of people, but I don't know, maybe there's tidbits that you didn't understand. Like, not all of our podcasts can be like self-improvement podcasts, right? Some of them have to be these in-depth, like, let's talk about Magic. So let's talk about the things that you can respond to that go in the stack, right? Triggers, spells, phases,
activated abilities. That might be it.
That
but
could
that's
be
a lot. But that's a lot.
That's like a lot of things.
That's like everything. That's like literally everything that happens in a game. Anytime your opponent does anything, you can probably respond.
I think that what's important, it's important to know that everything basically that you think that you could respond to other than damage uses the stack.
Right. Damage used to use the stack until they decided that was confusing and did away
with
it.
Trust me, it was not. It made cards like Secure Tri-Builder pretty intense.
Yeah, Sakura Tri-Builder was it's still good, but it was a lot better. It was a lot better. Go ahead. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say that you have to know these things in order to find those edges that we were kind of talking about. In order to even figure out where can I do things and things like that, you have to know how the game actually works. And that's kind of back in the day, early on in the podcast, we would blatantly steal Geojos, knowing is half the battle. But it's really true. You have to know how the game works in order to go and find your edge and find your advantage.
And a lot of the time, I think you will have some understanding of how things work on a kind of a basic level. But I think watching really good players and how they play spells and how they time them and trying to figure out why exactly they're doing things the way they are, just watching people better than you is a really good way to figure out kind of, okay, so I know the stack exists. I know hypothetically, if I think my opponent has Blossoming Defense, I don't want to flinch first, or I don't want the extra 2 damage to happen to me, so maybe I'm going to wait. But understanding how to actually maximize all of these small edges is really tricky. Depends a lot on board state. Depends on how long you can afford to wait. Right? There are situations where you might decide, well, I can't beat that here anyways, so I just need to go now. And I think just it's one of those things where, despite being relatively simple conceptually, it's incredibly complex in terms of how it actually plays. Yeah.
What if you were to actually, I think you just did. I was gonna say, if you were to summarize this, how would you say it? But I think that's it. It's important to know where your edges can be gained, and to make decisions from there.
It's like this, right? You can't choose an option you don't know you have.
Yes.
Right? You can't eat for dinner what you don't see on the menu. Right? And the secret is that a lot of the time you can sort of unlock different modes of cards, or if you're hurting your opponent's cards, you can lock up some of their modes through timing, using them on the stack correctly, and just trying to figure out how exactly these line up against each other, trying to figure out the weird interactions between different cards.
Right. All right. That is it for this week's Training Grounds. Thank you so much, Chad, for asking to do this. It's hard for us to know like what our listeners want to hear. So having those $25 a month patrons being able to just literally just tell us what to talk about, it's actually just a huge help for us. And I hope that you got something out of it, Chad. And it is just extremely appreciated.
Definitely.
So, yeah, and don't forget that in episodes where we're not having those people, if you are a patron of the show, we will be doing polls with a list of topics, and that I will post early in the week. So tonight, before I go to bed, I'll probably post a poll for next week's episode, and yeah, we'll get to talk about it. So, thank you so much, Chad, and thank you so much to all of our patrons for what you guys do for us today. Our next Patreon goal is changing. Right now it says, pay Michael and Danny. Actually, Michael, I have good news for you. I appreciate all of your hard work, and I would like to offer for the podcast to pay for your entry fee for one of your GPs at Vegas.
Sweet.
So if you would accept that, I would be happy to do that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, can't deny you when you ask me on air.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I did it that way.
Yeah.
No, I
appreciate
just want to say that, like, I know that people have really, really liked the Michael and I only episodes of Constructive Criticism. We hear you, and we will not be getting another co-host. And I think Michael and I are also enjoying ourselves. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's ultimately, we have fun doing it no matter what, and we want it to be valuable to you. So happy to listen to feedback, happy to try to work on getting better, although it's, obviously a slow process. And also, I just wanted to reiterate this again, really, really happy with all the help that Mason has given us. I think in terms of how things look, he has really, really improved what we have going on here. So huge shout out to Mason.
I agree. It's not every day that you can get Alex Sittner to give you a raise in your sponsorship for like just out of the blue, but we definitely went to bat for Mason, and we wanted him to get paid, and so I actually went out and approved another sponsorship specifically because Mason joined the team, and like it's really appreciated. And what we're doing, we hope, is improving, and the content's getting better and better, because when I say like we really believe in #always improving, it's because we really do. Like, we really want to be improving the show, the content, getting better at Magic, all of it. It's really important to us.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it's just a good time. So if it's valuable to you, happy to keep plugging along.
Yep. All right. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Michael Handrocker. You can also find me on Twitter at MagicMikeMTG. If you are going to be in Las Vegas this week and want to say hey, feel free to shoot me a Facebook message, and I'd be happy to, really more than happy. Although it might not come off like that because I'm kind of an awkward person, but I would be more than happy to say hey to you, talk about whatever. Just it's always nice to meet people.
I am happy to hear this. So I don't remember where we were, but after a GP, Michael told Casey, he's like, Casey, I'm so grateful for Spencer to be willing to like be the face of this show and like just deal with people, because I would never want to do what Spencer does and like interact with human beings. And it sounds like you've changed your tune on that.
I mean, I was mostly just giving you a hard time, but I do like talking to people. I do like, I don't know. If it makes your Grand Prix experience better, or really any experience better, just come and say hey. I appreciate that, and I don't know. I think I'm mostly a pretty approachable person, even if like if it doesn't seem that way, it's mostly it's me. It's not you.
Yeah, Mason says that he talked to you in Louisville and you opened up like a beautiful butterfly.
Oh well, I don't know. Now I just feel I feel transformed.
No, it really is this great feeling. Like last GP Vegas was like literally one of the most fun weekends ever. If you're in the Constructive Criticism family and you're going to Vegas, there's an agenda. Casey and I will be probably at every event that I posted. If Michael doesn't day 2, the last GP or whatever, like he'll be at a lot of those. We talked about doing a live podcast from Vegas. We still might, like, maybe Michael and I and Danny like do a Patreon only episode from there, because we're terrible at those right now, but whatever.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But either way, like, please come say hi to us in Vegas. So you can find me at Spencer13H on Twitter. You can find me on Spencer Stephen Howland on Facebook. You can join the Constructive Criticism family. It's a great place to find people who have similar minds to you, who are trying to improve at Magic. It's an amazing place. Like, it's my favorite place on the internet. It's like, if I am trolling the internet during the day, there are 2 places I am: our Discord channel and our Facebook group, which you can join both of. You can find the link to the Discord channel over in our Facebook group. Actually, you can find both over on our bio page, iconstructivecriticism.com. You can also join the conversation by joining the clan. You can it's at you just message me at Spencer13Dev on MTGO. My computer is in the shop right now, which, by the way, huge shout out to Keaton. So Keaton is one of the listeners of the show. My computer like blew up, and I was like kind of freaking out about it because it was from GameGrid. So GameGrid gave me a computer to stream with and stuff, and like do Magic stuff on. It's part of our sponsorship, and like it just caught on fire, and so I turned it off.
So sorry, I have to interrupt you. My girlfriend will kill me if I don't ask you this. Did you say it's lit when it caught on fire?
I didn't. I didn't.
So disappointing.
But you can tell High End that I said it if it makes her happier.
I mean, it would make me happier.
So anyway, so my computer lights on fire. I posted Twitter, immediately get a message from Keaton that's like, "Hey, I'm pretty sure it's your power supply. I can fix it." And then he, like, the timing didn't set up, so he actually called the guy at the shop, one of his friends, and like hooked me up. It's gonna be like no money at all to fix. Plus, they're actually gonna make it so I can do dual screens, so I'm happier to stream and stuff like that. Just wow, like, sweet. You guys are awesome. Our podcast listeners are just like way too awesome. Thank you so much.
And talented.
Yeah, like the number of like I've got, like, did you get your deck box yet, by the way?
No, I don't think so, but it might have been shipped to you, so
I didn't.
I don't know.
Now I feel stupid. Anyway, like, I've gotten a custom deck box. I've got it. Like, somebody sent me, multiple people have sent me like stuff for my baby. Like, you guys are unreal. I just appreciate you guys so much. So thank you so much. Hashtag would that be good? So hashtag would that be good? It's our Twitter outreach program. The number of times that I've wanted to get rid of this segment and people are telling me I'm not allowed to is like too many. So here it goes. Hashtag would that be good? It's our Twitter outreach program. If you tweet it, we'll read it. So let's get right into this. Okay. So we start at do we start at the 8th, right?
Yeah.
All right. Spencer13H, quote, "Never had bad Olive Garden experience." Hashtag really good. Here's the thing, is like, okay, so here's what happened. All right, this is a thing that happened. So we talked about, I don't know if we talked about this, so Chris Bakula says Olive Garden is like eating out of the garbage, right? And then on the podcast, I had said that I had never had a bad Olive Garden experience, which is true. And then Mason, tweeted that to Ben Stark, to Chris Bakula. I then saw Chris's tweet and was like, "Come on, Chris, this is such hyperbole." And then John Fingal says, "Have you seen the garbage in Chris's neighborhood?" I guess that's true. He could have great garbage. I don't know. But like, come on, guys. Like, it's hyperbole. It's not that bad. Stop it. I wish LSV would be on the next hashtag Bachelor. Maybe we could get more love and relationship sign-offs. Hashtag would that be good? LSV is married with a child.
And has a child named Naya, I believe. So
yeah. So hashtag that would be awkward.
Yeah, that would be awkward.
When will we finally get a Nico Bolas? And wait, what? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either. But that I don't know what a Nico is.
I don't get it. Let's Google this.
Oh, it's
No.
like it's a.
Oh, is this a cartoon?
It looks like it. I don't know. I'm not gonna try because
All right, Scotty,
I'm
you
gonna
gotta
fail.
give us Weebs a good pun. I don't know what this means. Apparently, I'm out of it. First homemade vodka gimlet. Hashtag would be good. It's amazing. And then it's a picture of my vodka gimlet. Guys, here's the thing. Michael and I both love gimlets. So if you're in Vegas and you want to buy us a drink, buy us a gimlet.
Well, buy Spencer too because I don't really drink, but
Wait,
yeah, I do
you
like.
gimlets.
Well, I do.
Oh, you just don't. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah,
That just won't.
I do. I
Fine.
do. I just
So
don't.
I need 2 gimlets. I'll drink Michael's.
Yeah, Spencer can be my liver, and we'll have a good time.
Bachelor in Paradise has been canceled. This is not good for anybody. Hashtag was good. Yeah, I saw that. I'm really sad. I hope everything works out. I feel really bad about whatever happened, and yeah,
Not
it would
much
not
to add
be
there.
good that Bachelor in Paradise is canceled. I don't think it's been canceled. I believe it's on. They're suspending filming, until they figure out what's going on. So, hashtag would it be good? Got my phone fixed. All right, this is embarrassing, and I'll tell it on the podcast. So this is my iPhone 6S. For those who know me really well, know that I've been like using my mom's iPhone like 5 for a little while. So for a long time, my phone was not charging correctly. And eventually it just stopped charging. And I had dropped it in the toilet like a long, long time ago. And I thought that like eventually there was just like it was just like like it's water damage. Like it just took a long time to like really sink in. And then I got really sick of my mom's iPhone, and I was like, what could be the worst thing that could happen, right? It needs a new battery and a new charging port, like whatever. That's got to be like $160. I'll take it in. So I take it in today, and the guy looks at it, looks at the end of it, and he's like, oh, there's just some gunk in the port. And he just like takes this pin and like scrapes it out, plugs it in, and he goes, okay, it's charging. Was it charging before? And I was like, nope. No, it was not. Thanks for cleaning out the gunk.
That's what he's paid for, man.
And I
It's all
like
good.
literally didn't charge me anything. He's like, okay, well here's your phone back, and I'm like, yeah, thanks. But I got my iPhone back. Let me tell you something. This phone is 120 gigs. My iPhone that I was using before was like 16 gigs. Man, this feels like
difference.
freedom. Feels like freedom. So yes, Andrew Elliott, it would be good if my iPhone was fixed, because now I can vlog from this and hand Michael the vlogging camera so that his vlog can be high quality. Hashtag would that be good?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much high quality will help me. That might not be my problem. Find out.
We'll talk about vlogging later. At Saffron Olive, devoted Druid plus pump spells, man, mono green storm. Hashtag would
I
be
feel
good.
like the pump spells are like.
How are you drawing the pump spells?
Well, beyond that, like your pump spells are a lot worse when you have to put a -1/-1 counter to add a mana. Like your pump spells get kind of crappy. I don't know.
Okay.
I would say I'm ambivalent.
All right. All right. Back in the gym from a busy MTG weekend. Time to hit the weights while listening to SEG Charlotte. Hashtag would it be good? Yeah.
I feel like it's hard to listen to Magic.
Yeah. So
Like-
I'm going to be making a pretty strong case to getting an elliptical or a stationary bike in my man cave to like watch Netflix and stuff, or like what I actually want to do. This is a hashtag I was improving things. Here's what I actually want to do. So Matt Kling and Michael Hinderocker playtest between the hours of like 10:30 p.m. to like 4 a.m. basically every night. So what I want to do is I want to get a stationary bike and work with them while they're controlling it, and then just get to talk to them and just really get my MTG on at the same time. That's like the dream, and I think I
Yeah.
can make the case to my wife. So
Yeah, I've been considering buying a stationary bike too, because they're not really that expensive, and like
they're really not.
I need some cardio equipment in my home.
Let's do it, Michael. Let's do it. We'll
All right.
just like make Matt our like cardio slave, and he has to control the MTGO, and you and I will just like get on our cardio bikes together.
Yeah, this podcast is going to be a lot more like a gym class in the future, apparently.
At Andrea, at Jeskai Ascendancy, it says 1 setup for every play mistake thus far this year. 4 sets of 25. 100 mistakes, 100 setups. Get ripped. Hashtag would it be good. Hashtag MTG Fitness. Real talk.
I'm pretty sure I could just do like sit-ups continuously and not.
Yeah, I could
outpace my
never
mistakes.
do as many sit-ups as I've made mistakes in Magic just this year alone. I would die.
Yeah.
I would legitimately die. Magic is hard, guys. And like, there's this real thing that I don't think people realize. The better you get at Magic the Gathering, the more of your own misplays you see, and you realize how terrible you are at Magic the Gathering. I would literally die. I could not do it.
Yeah. It's not always, I mean, so when you say mistakes, it's like they're not always costing you games or whatever, but there are things that cost you, 0.25% here and there, right? Where you're just like, yep, that was just wrong. There's just no reason to do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I just didn't think it through. Yeah.
All right. Last up. All right. Taylor Swift never being born. Hashtag would that be good? Hashtag we've got to go back. All right. Let's be clear about a few people. There are 2 people that are voices of generations in our time. 2 of them musically that are just like they speak for millennials. Taylor Swift and Kesha. End of story. Those 2 people, voices of generations. That's it. That's just a fact. That's a fact.
Just not going to endorse that, but
There's an episode of Glee where they do Kesha, and he's like, "The students are doing cat $sign ha." It's really funny. Anyway, now we talked about Glee on this podcast. Thank you everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. This is like a 2-hour podcast. It's been really fun. It was a fun one to do. We hope you guys got a lot out of it. Please leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget that you can subscribe on iTunes. You can check out our sponsors. Go to patreon.com. Check us out on Constructive Criticism. And yeah, we'll see you guys all next week.
Thanks for watching, guys.